Thank you. Really happy to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Sam. Like he mentioned, I've been here before. Love the energy in the room. So here's to another good session. My topic today is first 90 days as a new product manager. I think this is a very pertinent sort of topic to speak about, as more and more of us are passionate about product management and want to enter that industry and enter that field. As a product manager, I always like to start with the why. And so I want to give you not one, but 3 good reasons why it matters to have a plan of attack going into a new job. First one, you're either trying to break into product management, it's your first stint. You're trying to move up the ladder. You were historically an individual contributor and now you've suddenly become a managerial, moving into a role which is more managerial. Whatever the case may be, a plan of action, a plan of attack always helps. And having a plan for your first 90 days sort of cements your role and your place in the new job. Second, the earlier on you establish yourself, the earlier on you define your role and the impact that comes with that role, the better you will set yourself up for success later on. And so it's really important to build credibility early on, to build those relationships early on. The third, as a product manager, and this is just by virtue of the role we play, it is so cross-functional and so multidimensional that there's just a lot of stuff that needs to get done before you actually jump into product management. And so a plan of action will help you focus. It will bring discipline when you start that new job. So to summarize, plan of action will help bring discipline, it'll help you focus, and it'll help set yourself up for success. Okay. I'm obviously here to impart some of the insights I've gathered through several of my product roles. So just to talk a little bit about me, I've worked with small startups, I've worked with unicorns, I've worked with startups that have exited, I've worked with startups that have failed. B2B, B2C, I've worked with teams across the globe, Berlin, China, India, the Valley. So different cultures, different types of personalities. And I've, had the fortune of being the first product hire for some of these roles and then continued on to be one of the 60 or the 70 product managers. So I've seen sort of that mixed bag of roles. And so I've sort of synthesized all that I've learned in the past several years and tried to present a plan of attack for you. Okay, again, trying to bring my PM mindset. I've tried to limit the scope. So given the audience that I anticipated would be here, I've tried to cover topics that will help aspiring PMs and mid-level PMs. Also, I've tried to sort of have the agenda be the lowest common multiple, things that will help everybody across the board, whether you're an internal tools PM or a consumer-facing PM like me. So these are the 5 things I want to talk to you about. What should your first 90 days be about? Especially if this is your first role, where do you begin? How do you start? What is your first step? How do you build relationships with teams and people? This is very, very core to product management. At the end of the day, as a product manager, you're managing people. You're managing their ideas, their expectations, their time, and their personalities. So it's very important to build good relationships. Should you introduce process, especially if you're the first hire? Should you introduce process if you're the second, third, fifth hire? And if yes, when? When is a good time to say, I bring this to the table, let's implement this? When should you start thinking about the product vision, the product roadmap? Again, I'm not looking to talk about how you should build the roadmap specifically, but when should you start thinking about it in your new job or your new role? And then I'm going to briefly touch upon, while you're doing all of this, it's always good to check and see whether you're going in the right direction. And it's always good to measure, have a checkpoint, measure, and see how things are going for you. So let's get started. Again, we love frameworks. So what I've tried to do here is I've tried to take something that I use, especially in data mining and just generally initiatives at work. And I've tried to apply it here to distill everything I wanted to communicate to you. So it's a loop called the OODA loop. I don't know has anybody heard of it? Okay. It's I'll talk about it. It was, conceptualized in the 1960s by somebody in the US military. I believe a general or a colonel, I forget. But this is really, really, key to looking at data and distilling, breaking down problem statements. I usually use it, and that's what I've done here. The first is orient yourself. This is a new surrounding for you, a new ecosystem, a new environment, new people, and new tasks. Orient yourself. Do not rush to implement stuff. Do not rush to start, I want to build my roadmap. Wait and try to get your bearings around. Orient yourself. Set yourself up for success. Step 1. Step 2, observe. Listen and learn. How is your company operating? What are the gaps? What are the strengths? How is the sprint process? Is it 2-week? Is it 6-week? Why is it like that? How does the engineering team work with the design team? Is it a contractor designer? Or is it a full-time? Learn and observe. And then learn some more. So basically learn the lay of the land. Third step, you have a lot of information. As you're collecting that information, assimilate it and use it to start guiding and building your product strategy. So you're obviously there to own a product, own a feature, own a charter. Start funneling these learnings into that. And the last one is execution. This is the part that's meaty, that's exciting, that's what we are in it for. So it's the act. So orient, observe, decide, and act. And that's how I'm going to proceed through the presentation. It'll be one or the other of these steps. The first one, when you're setting yourself up, adapt to the tools and the softwares that your company uses. Is it Amplitude? Is it Omniture? Is it SQL? Is it, for example, you need to mine data? What other softwares does the company use to visualize data, to visualize roadmaps, to communicate with the engineering team? Set yourself up for that. The other thing you should also do is try and get as much as you need to succeed. So for example, when I went to one of my roles, I realized there was no A/B testing framework. And I felt that it would cripple some of my product initiatives had I not had an A/B testing tool at my disposal. So I asked for that and I got it. So if you think there's something that's core to your role, something that will sort of hinder your contribution to that role, please feel the need to ask for it and obviously justify it. But set yourself up with all the tools and softwares and be ready. Step 2, whatever platform your product is on, Apple Watch, desktop, mobile side, native apps, whatever the case may be, you should start aspiring to know the ins and the outs of that product. What are the design inconsistencies? What are the bugs? What are the bugs that will never get fixed? What are the critical bugs that need to get fixed? Where are the experience gaps? What are the flows that work well? What are the design elements that do well? You should start familiarizing yourself with all of this. And like somebody said, as a product manager, your forte is that nobody knows your product better than you do. That is what, at the end of the day, you bring to the table, right? You should know your product like nobody else. So start that process early. Data. I am a big believer in data. You must know the top metrics, the trends that your company needs to know, whether it's competitive landscaping or just internal trends. This business is seasonal. We always get our maximum orders on Sundays. There are hours of the day when we send push notifications and they are clicked way higher than if we would send them at night. You should start familiarizing yourself with all of these things. Not just that, What are the metrics that matter to your business? For example, when I was at Flipkart, we were at a scale where we had penetrated the entire Indian online market. So our metric was not user acquisition, it was user retention. What is that metric that matters to your company? You should speak that language. Third, who are your users? What do they look like? Where do they live? How do they shop? When do they come to the platform? Why do they come to the platform? How many times do they come to the platform? What are they looking for? How else can you serve them? This is all stuff you should start thinking about, poking here and there, start, looking at documents, looking at data. This is a tip that I usually generally share with all my PM friends, especially aspiring PMs. Let data tell you its story. I've seen, and I'm guilty of doing this early on in my career as well, torturing data to tell you something you want to hear. Don't do that. Let it tell you its own story and use it to your advantage. Okay, step 2. So we've oriented ourselves. We are getting into the ecosystem. Try to observe what is the protocol. So how does your product team or your core team, whatever is your core team, how does it build features? How does it think about product? How do the internal product team members work together to build stuff? How do they ideate? How do they brainstorm? How do they prioritize? How do they give each other feedback? How do they collect feedback from stakeholders? Who do they consider as their stakeholders? How do they decide that? For example, stakeholders could be users, stakeholders could be internal stakeholders like the business function or the marketing team or the engineering team or the logistics or the operations team. How does your team think about all these? How does the team interact? Start learning the ropes. Start seeing yourself in that role, in that team. And as you observe, obviously try to look at the strengths and the weaknesses, but at this point, be an observer. People. Like I'd mentioned earlier, I strongly believe product management is a lot to do with people management. Observe who are the different stakeholders in the company. Like I'd mentioned earlier, when you start diving deep into that, you will realize you will have a multitude of stakeholders with multitude of personalities and needs and demands. And they will all work with different working styles and different timelines. You must also understand when these stakeholders come together as a group under the company's umbrella, how do they interact with each other? So who's who? Who are the key decision makers? Who are the influencers? What are the dynamics? And also, I'd like to point out, build empathy for each of your stakeholders. Much like you build empathy for your customers, who are also, of course, a key stakeholder, build empathy for the design team, build empathy for the engineering team, build empathy for the business and the marketing teams and the operations and the logistics teams. It'll help you be a better product manager. This is the tip, more than an action item. Like I said, observe. And this is something I try to do more and more. I try to be a fly on the wall. So for example, when the design team is doing a mood board, I try to be a fly on the wall. I don't want to give them any comments. I don't want to give them any feedback, but I want to understand how they do this creative process. What are the metrics that they think of? What are the user experience gaps that they want to plug? How is it that they are prioritizing one thing over the other? It's really important for you to be in the shoes of the people not only you serve, but the people you work with, because you are the hub to many, many spokes. That is how you will make impact as a product manager. So try to be a fly on the wall, even not just for your first 90 days, but once in a while, try to observe what's happening in your teams, the teams that you work with. And especially and specifically for the first 90 days, do not judge why a team works in a particular way or why it's a 6-week sprint versus a 2-week sprint. ask questions and try to answer those questions around some concerns you may have, but don't judge at this point. It'll distract you from your plan of attack. Okay. Step 3. So we are gearing up towards the meatier stuff. You've learned a lot. So at this point, I'd imagine, you're starting to think of the product that you've been recruited for, the vision for that product. You're building the strategy while you're assimilating all these nuggets of information. So, you're reading API documentations, you're getting familiar with the tech stacks, you're reading past A/B tests and how they were conducted, for example. You're really looking at your customer personas and saying, this is a mind map for our main customer. You are sort of, and this is something I've done before and I find really useful. You go on site. So, you spend a day with your customer experience team. You spend a day with the operations team. You see them live in action, feel their pain. You're assimilating all of that information. It's a lot of information. Also, on the right, as you will see, you'll do a lot of asking. Why have we made these decisions today, and why did we make these decisions in the past? What was the rationale? Why did you pick this variant over the other even though it did poorly? What are some of the design decisions, etc. So you're asking a lot of these pertinent questions. Also, you, for example, are participating in retros. So you're trying to really understand what are the gaps in the deployment cycle today. How, as a product manager of this feature, can I up the game? How can I make this process more seamless? How can I introduce better prioritization techniques? What can I add to the table? So a lot of assimilating of information as a passive observer. A lot of information you're assimilating by asking proactively while you're thinking of the product strategy. So you're doing a lot. So keep, before you actually spring into action, don't lose out on all these nuggets of information. Synthesize them and keep documenting them. Okay, the fun part begins. So you're doing all this homework, you're preparing yourself. It's very important, especially in larger teams or when you're not the first or the second product hire, to really understand what is your role. More often than not, you'll find that there is a PM who's doing something that's kind of what your charter may be. And again, this is a problem of bigger companies, but if you happen to have that, just as, a principle, always define your role, especially if you're reporting into somebody. Understand what are the expectations from you. What have they hired you for? What is the needle that they want you to move? Start with that. Define your charter. Let that be step 1. Step 2, make sure all your key stakeholders, all the people that you're going to touch, whose lives you're going to impact, are aligned on that as you're building and thinking of the roadmap. And then this is a part of the research that we spoke about earlier, which is you've identified your customers, you've identified your stakeholders for your product. This is your product now. You're in your product domain, and you've built empathy for a lot of these stakeholders. So you've understood your role, you've understood your charter, you know who your stakeholders are, they are aligned with what you're doing, where your vision is going, and you've obviously understood your customers, or in the process of understanding them and building empathy. So now you're focusing on your product domain. Another part of step 3, or decide, is setting the stage. Now you're getting closer to defining the tangibles. Setting goals for your product. What are the KPIs that you own? What are the KPIs that you are accountable for? What is the cadence? So who are your immediate stakeholders? What is the cadence of meeting them? How do you funnel in feedback from these people? How do you funnel out feedback to these people, or your roadmap to these people? What is that feedback loop that works? Is it a weekly meeting? Is it a monthly sync up? And then get ready for step 4, which is act. This is, like I said, the really, really fun part. This is what we all love to do. It's getting our hands dirty. And what I mean by that is executing. So you've picked, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. So once you've identified your product domain, you know what your charter is specifically, you've defined goals for it, and you know, for example, say at Flipkart, I was responsible for user engagement. I knew what my goal was, so I had set goals for myself. I want users on the Flipkart platform to come back 4 times in a month. This is a hypothetical arbitrary KPI, say, for example. I've set a measurable goal for my product. I know who are my immediate stakeholders for the first thing that I want to ship in the 90 days. And you must aspire to ship something, or at least get something rolling in motion within your first 90 days. So once you've done all the first 3 steps, prep yourself to start shipping something or get something in motion. And this is that part. So getting your hands dirty with actually shipping something with the team. This could be big or small. It doesn't have to be a 6-month, 1-year feature. It could be just optimizing for the login experience and adding email verification to it, because so many accounts are lost and people have a bad experience because they forget to put a dot before the com, and then they have to keep creating multiple accounts. Maybe you're solving for this. So get your hands dirty, execute on something, and then don't forget to measure it. I want to emphasize on this because I feel like we forget to do this for ourselves. We do it a lot for our products, where we have a KPI and we say we anticipate a 20% increase in login conversion, but it didn't happen, or it happened, and we define success by that. But as PMs, and when you're implementing this plan of action, do measure success for this as well. So when you execute this particular feature or this initiative, however big or small it may be, go back and understand what you did right and what you did wrong. And this is really important, so that if you don't do this, if you don't listen to feedback, if you don't measure your success, if you don't measure what went wrong and what went right, and you don't learn from it, you will never push yourself to iterate. And why that is really important is, in our business, it's really, really, really important to build credibility. So I'll give you an example. I'm a non-technical product manager. And it's very, very important for me to build credibility with my engineering team. And you do that by listening, by learning, by improving every single time. So whatever company you work with, whatever your role is, whatever your charter is, whatever your product domain or KPI is, make sure that you're constantly trying to take information, assimilate it, understand it, and use it to better yourself as a PM, whether it's building better relationships, or it's building empathy for your customers, or it's looking at data in an unbiased way. Make sure that when you launch something, you go back and say, I didn't set the A/B test right, or I didn't work with the engineering well, and push yourself to do better. And I'd say that the goal of this entire exercise is to really build credibility. People have to trust you to hand you over a product and its fate. So you have to do a good job of that. So I've said a lot. I'm sure it's a lot of information. What I've done is I've actually tried to relay everything that I've said in a summary format with a timeline. So 90 days is about 12 weeks. I'd say, and again, this is notional, it could be plus, minus, but start with setting up, because you are not going to get time to do this again. I remember at Shipt when I joined, my second day I got something that I had to ship in the next 3 days. And if I look back in hindsight, had I had more time to sort of set up, I would have really, gained from it. Not that I didn't enjoy jumping into execution soon, but use this time. If you have the time and the bandwidth, set yourself up with all the tools, all the softwares, all the data dashboards that you want. Familiarize yourself top to bottom. Be a fly on the wall. See people, notice their personalities. How do they work? How can you motivate them in the future? What are their styles? What motivates them? How do they work with the product team? How does the product team work? What are the processes they use? What's the protocol? Do all of that. Start learning the ropes. So from being a fly on the wall, try to be a more active participant. Start building your vision. So once you know what your role is, what product you've been hired for, what is your exact charter, start building the vision, start building your roadmap, start looking at what has been accomplished so far, why that was done. Set the stage for you to ship something or at least get the ball rolling. In terms of splitting the time, I'd say this would be the rough sort of split I'd imagine if I look back at all my roles. Again, this differs from person to person, circumstance to circumstance, and like size of the company and who you're working for, how many PMs they are. But I'd say spend, the first half or slightly less really trying to orient and observe. You will not get this chance and this time to do these two things later on. It will get way more difficult. And then spend the latter half of your 90 days trying to focus on why am I here? What metrics do I need to move? How can I do that? What's more important? How do I prioritize? Who are my stakeholders? How can I build empathy? How can I keep that loop going? And when should I stop and measure myself and then actually act? Try to ship something and build that early sort of trust with your team members and then learn very, very quickly from it so that the next time you do it or the third time you do it, you're really the better for having done it early on. I hope this helps everybody who's starting a new stint put their best foot forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yes, please.
So this is you conveniently provide out for breaking down the first 90 days.
Right.
You have a week of orientation, and then you have each of these are broken up into 2-week sprints.
Notionally, yes.
A 2-week window. I mean, at the time when you're coming in as a product manager, you're working with a development team.
Right.
So at the same time as you personally are a fly on the wall and everything else,
right.
How are you, if you aren't an associate, if you
sure.
are taking on the product manager role that was already there,
right.
How are you adapting to what their expectations are? Because you're still providing, the backlog and the sequencing.
Right. And this has happened to me before. So if I understand your question correctly, it is that you've step into another PM's role. So there is a backlog already. You're not starting a product from scratch. It's something that's already in motion. I'd say at that point, you'll have to juggle these two things. And maybe it's not a week of orientation. Like I said, I got like 2 days or 3 days of orientation. The orientation that I've defined here, which is you really get time to set yourself up with softwares and tools and stuff like that. At that point, you basically juggle. But what I'd recommend is to not lose sight of this plan of attack, to not, in that process of jumping into, executing on the backlog of the previous product manager, that you lose sight of the fact that you are a new entrant into the team, that you still need to build relationships, that you still need to understand the protocol, that you still need to get into the groove of, this is how I work with the developers and this is how I motivate the designers, because that is a large part of what we do. And I think I forget the name, but somebody's articulated this really well. Product managers are the only people who don't have a direct workforce under them, but they still have to lead or influence a large group of people, and it is not easy. So that starts with building the rapport early on. So I'd say to the situation that you described, I'd still juggle being a fly on the wall and executing whatever is in motion. Did that answer your question?
I do have a follow-up, but I want to leave for
Sure. Yes.
How do you handle conflict that you might encounter, early on? And
Sure.
how do you balance sort of asserting yourself and maybe asserting point of view?
Right.
You're new, but
Right.
it's your product.
Right. That's a great question. And I think that just happens to happen throughout, senior or mid-level or early product manager. Conflict management is something we just have to keep getting better at. And what I'd say to that is let it not be a me too discussion. And what I mean by that is everybody in the room is saying, I think it should be this and I think it should be that. I think as a product manager, what you can really do differently is bring funnel insights from data and funnel insights from customers and funnel insights from metrics. So for example, if somebody, is saying we shouldn't focus on the homepage, we should focus on, login. One way to think about this is how many new users do we get every day versus how many users use the homepage? Step one, look at the data. If we were to improve this versus this, what is the impact? And what metrics are we, trying to hit? So when you get all these sort of data points and insights and perspectives into that conversation, it's less about what you want versus what the other person wants. It's what are we trying to solve for and what will solve it better. And it's, I think, another thing that I've learned over the years is fall in love. And I think somebody said this in another talk that I'd heard is be in love with what you're solving for. Don't make the solution your baby. So don't be in love with what you think is the right solution. Be in love with the problem. And sometimes that helps to resolve some of these conflicts as well. So bring in these unbiased perspectives, bring in these insights, bring in the numbers to talk and build the story. And sometimes that really helps manage these conflicts. Yes, please.
In terms of introducing process, which you talked a little bit about at the beginning,
right.
Would you try to shift something in the first 90 days with all existing process before you try to change things?
Sure. Again, I think it really depends on how much process there is when you join. So, for example, in one of my roles, when I joined, there was literally no process. And so for you, in order for you to be successful in that first feature that you ship or the first initiative that you ship, you need some of that process. You need maybe a sprint. There is no sprint or concept of sprint. You need a proper time for QA. You need things to be designed for, in a particular manner. And so it really depends the stage at which you enter and what it is that you're shipping. So for example, if it's an internal tools, you're an internal tools PM and you're changing something to the admin dashboard, for example. Maybe you don't need to processify as much as you would if it was consumer facing. And, again, depending on the scale of the company, if it's 1 million users versus 10,000 users. So process definitely helps, but depending on the scale of the company and the stage of the startup, processifying too much also doesn't necessarily help. So you have to really listen and learn and see, what will work. And again, this is a trial and error process also sometimes. When there is lack of process, you'll really have to try what's going to work. So it depends on sort of just the situation. But process really helps. So I'll sort of guarantee that process helps. So if there is no process whatsoever, getting it into the picture will help streamline things. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you educate your stakeholders on the value of product management? If you happen to be working with a team that doesn't understand true product management,
Right.
and how you sort of navigate that while also educating and
Right,
their
right,
knowledge.
right. Again, a great question, and you might have to do this time and time again as new people join the team and priorities shift, and there are new executives on the board and stuff like that. I think one thing that really helps is showing documented impact. So, look at what you've done in the last 6 months. Really, again, with an unbiased lens, look at what you've accomplished. So, for example, I'll give you an example of something we did at Shipt, where we introduced a pop-up which asks you to rate the App Store, give an App Store rating while you're inside the app. And only if you give it X rating does it follows up with a question, or it accepts the rating. And there is some logic to when we ask you that App Store rating question. Now, this took our app ratings from whatever it was to 4.9, right? And this is a tangible impact because this is the storefront. So when you're window shopping in the App Store and you're looking at all the on-demand grocery services, you will look at the reviews and say, this is a 4.9 and that's a 3. And so we are really creating a better first impression. That is a tangible impact. And so when you have these conversations, or when you're trying to really highlight or bring to the forefront the impact that your team makes, you should look back and say, these are the big initiatives, these are the things that we are accountable for, and this is what we've done for those things. It could be better user experience, it could be better funnel optimizations, it could be the money that you've saved. For example, when you optimize for a login and you better that conversion, you're actually saving marketing dollars. That's tangible impact. So bring that to the table, bring that into the conversations, and having that mindset also helps when you are aligning stakeholders. So when you build a business case for a product initiative and you say, I think we should add this to the product because it's going to impact 70% of our repeat users, and it's going to save them X seconds every time they search for something, and it's going to lead to bigger baskets, you will have more interest and you'll pique more curiosity versus saying, I think we should build this. So try to bring some of those things to the conversations, and sometimes this may not work, but you should keep at it, and at some point this will start becoming the language that the stakeholders will sort of respond to. Sure. Hi.
In your experience as a non-technical PM, what communication tools or other tools did you use to collaborate with your development team on what your definition of done is and what automated or unit tests are needed for that definition?
Sure. So we use Clubhouse. I've used Jira. We use Clubhouse currently in my current role. And the definition of done, you bring up a very good point. This is again something with years of experience, you will realize that it's really important to define what done is. And so we have a QA team who they write their own test coverage and own unit tests, and they have their own mechanism of QAing. So our team, the product team, doesn't do that. But the way we communicate is there is a product brief document which basically says what's in scope and what's out of scope. So for example, it'll say we are trying to do A, but we will not do B and we will not do C. So it very clearly says that. The other thing that really helps with that definition of done is when you have a testing plan. So you say, for example, I'm going to launch this in these cities or this member base. Say you're testing something. I'm going to roll it out for 2 weeks or till it hits 100K users. I'm looking for this metric to move by X%, roundabout. And I don't want this metric to drop. And if this product, once launched for that amount of period and exposed to those many members, hits those 2 metrics that I've defined, it's a success and we'll roll it system-wide. So you have to be very, very clear, crisp, and communicate that to the team when you're launching these products. What it also helps you avoid is traps. So this is where if you don't have a good testing plan articulated or the definition of what is done, 2 things will happen. First, there will be scope creep. What that means is you wanted to build A, but you will be, let's do B also. While we're doing B, let's do C also. And then it'll become a never-ending thing. Don't fall into that build trap. And the second thing, if you don't have your metrics and how you anticipate the impact on them with a particular product feature, you will post facto torture data. See, it's doing this to the login rate when the product initiative is on checkout. And you'll try to like storyboard these random things and you'll try to say it's a success because we all want successful products. Don't fall into that trap. So define what is done and define what is success. I hope that answered your question.
I follow up with people.
Sure. Okay. Yes, please.
So if something does go wrong, it
Right.
doesn't have to be in the 90 days, but let's say you've been a PM for 6 months and you've owned the feature and
Right.
if something doesn't go according to the plan,
Right.
how do you make sure it doesn't affect your credibility?
Very good question. So, credibility, at least in my experience so far, doesn't come from, or being a good PM, of course, if you keep building bad features, it's not going to look good to anyone, but failing on something or taking a bet on something and it not working is absolutely normal. I'd say, and again, this is anecdotal, 7 out of 10 things don't work the way you plan them. Or you will think that this is going to do X, but it will end up doing Y. Because as much as you know about your users, you really don't know how they're going to use that product. And that is why you see products pivoting. Why do products pivot? It is because you thought people are going to use it in this way, but users are using it for something else. And that is why products pivot. So what you should in that case do, and the mindset you should have is, why did it fail? Was I looking at the wrong problem? Did nobody care for this solution? Did I do my user research wrong? Did my designs not live up to the expectations? Are they not intuitive? Did people not want this? Was I too late in the market? And there are better solutions for this? There could be so many reasons for it. So focus on the why and use it to inform your next initiative. And that's why I had that slide on, once you ship something, check in on it, like listen to what's happened, measure what's moved, why did it not move, and what you can learn from that to do better in the future. So do not feel disheartened or discouraged or question your product management abilities at all if any bet that you've taken doesn't live up to the expectations. That happens to the best of us, and it has to happen. We can't predict the future. But what you should do is learn from it and understand as a product management what you did wrong and what you can do better next time. Sure.
So starting a new position, you have a plan for your first 90 days.
Right.
You get in, it's a pre-existing position, fast-paced work. And
Right.
you have all these demands on you.
Right.
How do you recommend managing up and managing down so that you can integrate, but then also deal with these personalities?
Right. I think it's very similar to the question he asked. And I've had to deal with that many times over. You just have to, it's something that needs to get done. So maybe you can be a fly on the wall for 2 meetings and not 5, or maybe just 1 meeting. The other thing is, if, you know, you don't have time, you're just pulled into like 5 directions, use that as an opportunity while on the go, on the field, while you're on site. Use that opportunity to really learn people. Maybe don't be the, let me do this, know-it-all personality. Don't come across as that and sort of start delegating to people. Maybe take time to do that and let people drive a fair portion of the project. Really understand, again, how the engineering team works. What are their sprints? Maybe they do a 6-week sprint. You come in, you observe them for the first project, and then you start, hinting at them that maybe we should try a 2-week sprint, or maybe we should try agile, or maybe we should do this. But don't start with that, would be my suggestion. Sure, yes.
This is going to be an interesting contrast to that question, I think. But I don't know where this saying came from, but somebody said once that if Henry Ford had asked his customers what they wanted, that they would have just said faster horses.
Yes.
I'm curious if you've been in a situation
Yes.
where your vision differed substantially as it evolved from the one that was in place, and how you approached
Absolutely.
communicating that to stakeholders and to your own team.
Sure. So I'll answer that in 2 parts. The first part, absolutely, just to speak to what Henry Ford articulated, that happens all the time. Your customers will be, they'll say, why don't you build this? And thousands of them will say, why don't you build this X thing? What you need to understand as a product manager is, why are they asking for that? What are they trying to solve with that? So for example, somebody will say, give me the option to have delivery slots 10 days into the future. That's a solution. But what is the problem? So what Henry Ford really did was, what do users want in terms of the need versus what is the solution that they think that they need? Did that make sense to you? Okay. And then the second part that I wanted to answer to your question was, sorry, it's not coming to me, changing the vision and changing the product strategy. Yes, again, that happens to a lot of us, and I'll tell you why. Because the way roadmaps are, is they're usually built 6 months to 12 months. I know that that period is now shortening, but legacy was 6 months to 12 months. Most of the startups that we work with are so fast-paced, and they're scaling so fast that the persona that you were solving for 6 months ago is no longer the persona which is driving 80% of your revenue today. And so what that means is that your roadmap needs to evolve, and you need to be on top of that, which is why being in constant touch with your stakeholders, including your customers, is very, very important. And so this happens all the time. And what you need to do is, again, be the hub to those spokes, and you need to communicate, at a cadence. I'd mentioned that. Keep communicating your roadmap to your stakeholders. They should speak the same language as you. And that's what makes for a really harmonious team. So again, roadmaps change. They should change for a good reason. Sometimes what you had thought would be a good solution no longer makes sense. You're changing your stack, you're changing your infrastructure, you've acqui-hired a new team. Lots of stuff can change over 6 months. And so roadmaps can change and evolve. You just need a solid business case for it, which is what we need for every single product initiative that we have. So just speaks to that.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, please.
So as a non-technical PM, you talked about earning credibility with your tech team.
Yes.
And also in your first 90 days, digging into the tech stack.
Yes.
Can you talk about digging into the tech stack as a non-technical PM?
Sure. This is the approach that I've taken so far. Is I really like to understand not only how the tech team works, like I'd said, but what are their limitations. And when you start thinking about, and I'd mentioned this, building empathy, you'll realize why the development team says, I can't build this in 5 days. I need 5 weeks. And for you to be able to understand that decision and where that's coming from, you should not be clueless on why. And a lot of that understanding will come from, how does the API work? And this needs to be block diagrams. You don't need to know, who wrote the code, when was it written, what's the tech debt. Of course, it's good to know all of that, but like to begin with, it's important for you to know what are the services we have. Is it like one monolith service? Is it one API, or is it broken into, smaller services? How do they talk to each other? What are the roles of these services? Just simple block diagrams for you to understand this service is the search service and this service is the recommendation service, and this is when they talk and this is when they don't talk. Stuff like that, when you know and you bring those to the conversations, helps you build credibility, because now you're building empathy with your development team, not only in terms of their timelines and their, deliverables, but also in their constraints and their advantages. So for example, just the other day I realized I found, this way of looking at what is the API response to a front-end screen. I just chanced upon it when I was talking to. I felt so empowered, because now I know that on that screen I have this this information or metadata as it's called. And I started thinking about, this is available information. Do I need any of it to surface? And all of this does not require you to code or understand how code is written. It is logic and it is structure. So you must acclimatize yourself with that. It really helps. Sure. Yes, I'll come to you. Yes.
So, with all of your experience with different companies,
Right.
I'm wondering if there's a shorthand that you've developed, working with different functions, over and over again, maybe some patterns, like, okay, with design, with engineering. I know that each case is different, but I also wonder,
yes.
Patterns with different functions.
Yes. I think, good news or bad news, again, you said it yourself, it just varies depending on the pace of the startup, the personalities involved, and what are the priorities for the company. But I'd say at a high level, even before I make the case for something like a product, I need to convince myself that this is something that merits itself to be on the roadmap. That's one approach that has always worked for me. And why I like to do it is I like to anticipate all the questions my stakeholders would have for me, and I try to answer them. So for example, this will require us to build, a new service, and that service is only going to be used for this. So it will be kind of, a very big tech effort for a small pool of users. So when I'm thinking of products or I'm thinking of my roadmap, I do two things. The first, I always try to align to what's important for the company, because anything outside is noise, right? So if Flipkart is, for example, focusing on retention, and I'm trying to drive products that drive new users, I'm not in alignment with what the company wants. So that's one. And again, when you will be empowered when you have alignment with what the business wants. That's one. And the second is when you have a solid case for whatever it is that you are proposing. So who is it going to impact? What is the impact going to be? Why is that metric important? There is no real pattern. There's no strategy that, works that I've used throughout my roles, and you always tweak and learn. But I think the one thing that has stayed true is, how can I build credibility? How can people trust me with a product or with executing on something, or, making sure that we are focusing on the right thing. We are doing what's best for the users. And I think that all ties into, can people trust you, and how can you build that credibility? So I think when you wed yourself to the product and solving for the users of that product, you will just make the right decisions. And I think that's the pattern that has seemingly worked. Again, I think I quoted this before, but be in love with what problem that product is solving and not with solutions. When you distance yourself from solutions and be razor focused on, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. I'm trying to solve for this, is when people will start rallying up. You'll be able to rally up your stakeholders. Yeah. Yes.
From your experience, at what point in a company do you believe it's important to convey to its stakeholders that a more measurable, sustainable development process has more value than sporadic big wins or pushes to production? And how do you calculate that value? Or alternatively, do you think there are companies where that's just never the case?
I can't say for sure if it's never the case. But what I can say is that there is a point in time in a startup's journey. Usually this is more valid for startups, where there is, lack of a structured process, and then you want to bring in a process, is for you to try it once. So much like you A/B test, and we did this again at one of the roles I've been at, where there was considerable resistance to, we don't want to be processified into this process that you have. We are doing just fine doing things the way we do them. At that point, you need your colleagues to sort of, you need to motivate them to say, let's give it a try and let's see. And then you also have to be unbiased about it. If your colleagues feel that there's going to be unbiased sort of measure of success on both ends, I think you'll be able to get them to do it. And we've done that. It might take fewer or more conversations depending on, the potency of the team members you're up against. But trying this, so we tried this, it worked really well. The development team was really happy, design team was really happy, we were really happy. And then we tried to, import that into other teams and other projects and other initiatives. So sometimes it's just about convincing them to say, let's give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And you go into that with that mindset, and sometimes that works. Yes.
You talked about a few ways.
I'm so sorry. I'll get to it. Yes.
You talked about a few ways that you check in on yourself.
Right.
And revisit like the product strategy.
Right.
Or your own belief about the product,
Right.
customer, or your own trajectory. I'm wondering, like, tactically, what do you build into your schedule? If you build into your schedule, like those checks, and like what questions do you ask yourself?
Sure. So the one thing I do very, very diligently, and I'm really disciplined about, in fact, annoying about, is I read every single NPS survey of the experience that I lead. I read every single feedback that comes in via email or chat. I read every idea, suggestion, complaint, grudge. I hear calls every Friday. I listen into calls. I look at what the customer support team, they have this Excel where they categorize themes for that particular week or that particular time interval. I look at data day in and day out. Those are some of the things I've come to discipline myself on because they really come handy. For example, knowing the pulse of your users, knowing who they are, like I said, what do they look like? Why are they using your product? How often do they come? Stuff like that is something that you should just be able to talk about in your sleep. Like, what are the pain points of your users? And what do they love about your product? These are two things you should know. Again, it helps drive the right problems to solve. And so that is one thing I make it a point to do very regularly. Data is another thing. I look at data every week, if not on a more frequent cadence. Data, again, will tell its own story. It'll guide you. It'll give you a sudden peak or a sudden drop, and then you understand why. For example, NPS scores dropped in a particular month for us. Why did that happen? When I double-clicked, and it only happened because you are close to data. You look at it every day and you see, this is not normal. This is not seasonal. This is outside of the deviation that you usually see. And so you're able to really pounce on opportunities and problems. So that's one thing I do. Another thing is I try to have this process of starting an initiative, like from concept to executing it. I try to follow that. Documentation, I'm a firm believer of documentation. I always have this one source of truth for all stakeholders. And so that's really helpful sometimes, when somebody wants to check, this is what we discussed in the last meeting, there'll be the meeting notes. So you are kind of you're funneling everything into this one document, and it specifies everything about that product and everything to do with that product. And same for roadmap and vision. The other thing is, I think, communicating. Communicating is really important. When you're launching something, who should be aware about this? When you're analyzing something, who should you share that knowledge with? Who can benefit from that analysis? For example, I do some analysis and I realize the operations team can use this insight to guide some of their offering system algorithm. Stuff like that. And that is, again, how you start building these relationships and these rapport, because people realize that you're there, you're passionate about your product, and you're there to solve the right problems. So those are some of the things that help. I'm sure there are others, but these were top of mind right now. Sure. From a day-to-day perspective. Sure. Yes, please.
So what type of advice would you give to somebody, like in my situation where I'm a new product manager, but I've been at my company for a couple years?
I see.
So I'm same table, but I have a different seat now.
Sure. Interesting. Congratulations. I think what you have going for you is you already have these relationships in place. You don't have to adapt to the ecosystem. You've been a part of the ecosystem. You've interacted with these people. I think now what will help you is to change the lens. Maybe you've been in a different role, which was not as product heavy or product focused, but now, you have this product in your hands and you are really the champion of that product. And so your day sort of begins with what's working well, what's not, what is the vision for this, where do I want to take this in 3 months, 6 months, what are my projects in flight, who is working on what, how can I drive this deliverable on time, who do I need to communicate with for that project. There'll be a lot of multitasking, there'll be a lot of communication, there'll be a lot of analysis, there'll be a lot of decision making and hard decisions that you'll need to make now. You'll have to justify a lot of these decisions to say data said this or user said this. You'll have to rally a lot of folks towards a common goal, and these people will not be your reports. So that is another challenge that will come your way. And again, you will be, some companies have different product management roles, but usually you will be like at the center of all these teams, and you will be keeping all of them in alignment, keeping them on the same page. You will be the source of truth on where the product's headed and why. And so those are the things that will change for you. But the good thing is that you won't have that initial orientation, observation kind of things as much as somebody who's new on the job. So you can really focus on building your vision, building your strategy. You can take time to really look at data and say, why haven't we solved for this? Or why haven't we done this? Or these are the new users we can acquire and this is why, or, whatever is plausible. But yeah, sure. Sure. Yes, please.
I'm in a similar scenario as she is.
I see.
And I'm wondering if when you're transitioning from your prior role to the PM role,
right,
how much do you want to balance the expertise you have in that given area and advocate on behalf of that. So for example, I was doing product documentation and UX writing. And so what I'm really excited about is onboarding and communicating during the first, certain amount of days with users using their platform.
Sure.
How much do I focus on that, or how do I balance focusing on bringing those things to the table as a PM versus, buying into what other initiatives are going on and waiting my turn for those features to come up?
So again, great question. This is something that will happen new or existing to all PMs, right? And it'll keep happening. This is what is one of the skills we have to learn, which is prioritization. And what that means is that top down, somebody will come up with an idea and say, let's build this. Or your head of product will say, I think this is a good idea. Or, 1,000 of your best customers will say, we'll leave your app if you don't build this for us. Or XYZ, right? You as the PM, you have to really justify not just those ideas, but your own ideas as well. And you sort of go back to the basics. I feel like I'm repeating myself, unfortunately, but you really go back to the question of what does this solve for and what does that idea solve for? Do we need to solve for that problem? Is it going to impact 2% of the user base or 98% of the user base? Is it going to impact revenue generating users or just random people on the platform? These are hard questions that you really have to evaluate a lot of these ideas on. And a lot of the times I have realized, and this happened to me very recently also, that I was really, really passionate about this one idea, and I've been passionate about it for a while. But when I really got into building the business case for it and saying, should we invest time and effort into this, or should we invest time and effort into that? I had to be unbiased and, my heart was broken, but I had to say, no, this is what's more important for our users. And so you have to do that on a recurring basis. So you could be really close and passionate about something, and that could be close to your heart, but go back and say, is this important for my users or not? Because at the end of the day, that is what you're accountable for. Not the number of features you ship, not how well you ship them. Of course, this contributes to how well you do, but at the end of the day, if you're managing an app and the app is, doing well and better, that is what you're accountable for. So you just have to prioritize. And you will get those ideas from all directions. So welcome to our world, but that happens all the time. Sure. There are a lot of techniques on prioritization out there. I can share links with you and share other insights that I have with you on that. Sure. There was one more question. Great. Thank you so much for listening.